Hi, I'm Maggie.
And I'm Marin, and you're listening to
Tell Me I'm Sorry,
a podcast where we deconstruct and muse on depictions of girlhood in film, literature, and other media.
A feminist celebration of pop culture, the audacity of youth, and the ways we grow away from and into our bodies, beliefs, and dreams for ourselves and each other.
And today we're discussing
Cruel Intentions.
Folks, when they say they don't make them like they used to anymore,
Thank God.
is this what we mean? We are talking about Cruel Intentions, directed by Roger Kumble, who this was his first directorial outing. But he has since directed many other things, including Cruel Intentions 2.
What?
Which is not a sequel. It's a prequel that does not have any of the original cast and originally wasn't even supposed to be a movie. It was supposed to be a TV show, and the pilot was picked up and they shot episodes of it, and then the network canceled it before it even aired. So they cobbled together TV footage to make a 90-minute direct-to-TV movie. So he directed that. He's directed The Sweetest Thing. He directed the Netflix original Falling In, INN, Love.
Sure.
And he also directed the film After We Collided, which is the second film in the After franchise, which, if you do not know what the After franchise is, I applaud you. And if you do know what the After franchise is and have possibly seen movies in it, like I have, then that is a burden that we can all share together.
Okay, but what I want to know... Is there no way this... Is it so bad that you can't...
It's based on a book that was originally written to be Harry Styles fan fiction. Wow. And it involves a bet to have sex with a girl. So it's in the spirit of this movie.
Classic.
But they made like 5 of them. He only directed the one. He directed the second one. Roger Kumble also wrote this movie, though it's worth noting that this movie is a modern retelling of the 1782 French novel Dangerous Liaisons, which I have started reading and will perhaps talk about later. This movie was released March 5th, 1999. And as for our poster tagline, we have, in the game of seduction, there is only one rule. Never fall in love. Honestly, no notes.
This movie is what it is, and so that it's perfect.
Right.
It's perfect for it.
It's perfect. The dissonance also of when you look at the original theatrical poster with Ryan Phillippe's scowling face and dead eyes with this tagline that's alluding to falling in love, it's just really bizarre and frankly quite funny. And we do have a log line. I cheated and I didn't use the Google one because I didn't think the Google one was dramatic enough. So I've pulled this one from Letterboxd.
Okay.
And I'm excited for you to read it because you're really good at reading these.
What? I'm sorry. Already the first word.
I know.
Are they trying to be literary?
I think so.
Okay. Slaking a thirst for dangerous games, Catherine challenges her stepbrother, Sebastian, to deflower their headmaster's daughter before the summer ends. If he succeeds, the prize is the chance to bed Catherine. But if he loses, Catherine will claim his most prized possession.
Which is just his fucking
It's
car.
a fucking car, yeah.
That was so funny to me. Which, yeah, it's like a Jaguar from the 1950s that's worth a fuck ton of money, but it's just a car.
They're also so rich, she could just buy one herself.
I know. And so the way it builds up that cliffhanger intrigue at the end when it's literally just his car, I also found really funny.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I have to explain Cruel Intentions, which is gonna take a while. Look at...
Oh my God.
Because at first I was like, oh, well, I don't have to mention this, and I have to mention this. But then as you get more towards the end and everything becomes very intertwined, I was like, oh, wait, if I don't mention that at the beginning, then when I mention this thing at the end, people are going to be like, why the fuck is he fighting with some guy named Ronald in the street? So I have to explain who Ronald is at the beginning. You know what I mean? Because this movie is very meticulously plotted.
But it's bad still.
Yeah.
It's meticulously plotted, but like the plot is bad because it's all hinging on these very specific expectations about what people would desire, what rich white people would desire.
Right.
But I think this film is trying to hold some level of universality to say this is what being a human is like.
Yeah.
Most people aren't this terrible.
No.
Anyway, sorry. Go.
Okay. Also, there will be editorializing in this summary because...
How could you not?
Okay. Sebastian Valmont, who is played by Ryan Phillippe, he is the skeeviest motherfucker in all of New York City, probably the whole world. If we're being honest. Okay. He is a teenager who wears suits all the time, and he commits cyber and sex crimes. And also, he has the hots for his stepsister, Catherine, who is played by Sarah Michelle Gellar. And it's the summer before their senior year of high school. They are parentally unsupervised in their Upper East Side penthouse, just scheming to destroy people because that is their idea of fun. And Sebastian is always writing in his journal. This becomes important later. Catherine has recently been dumped by her boyfriend, who is named Court, and she wants to seek revenge against Court by having Sebastian seduce Court's new girlfriend, Cecile, who is played by Selma Blair. And Sebastian, who has a very public reputation as a Lothario, tells Catherine that he is bored, quote, screwing New York debutantes. I believe he calls them insipid. He's bored screwing insipid New York debutantes and says that he wants more of a challenge. And so he shows Catherine an editorial he read in 17 magazine, written by a girl named Nanette, who's played by Reese Witherspoon. And in Nanette's editorial, she has said that she does not want to have sex until she's married, right? Is it married or just in love?
Oh. In the article, I assumed she was talking about premarital sex.
Right.
But then later, when she's talking in person with him, she makes it sound like she's just waiting to be in love, which I think is ironic because the way she talks about her boyfriend is you would assume that she is in love with her boyfriend.
Right. So I think it's maybe supposed to be it's marriage. And so in Annette's editorial, she has said she doesn't want to have sex until she's married because she wants to be in love the first time she does it. And she doesn't think teenagers are mature enough to make that decision yet. And it turns out that Annette is going to be attending Sebastian and Catherine's school in the fall as a new student because she is the new headmaster's daughter. And she's currently spending the rest of the summer at Sebastian's aunt house on what he calls the island, which I'm assuming that means Long Island. I don't know New York geography. She knows Sebastian's rich aunt and is staying with her. Point is, Sebastian decides that it would be a fun, worthy challenge to manipulate and seduce Annette. And Catherine is very intrigued by this idea and proposes the bet that we mentioned earlier. If he succeeds in having sex with Annette, he can have sex with Catherine. And if he doesn't succeed in having sex with Annette, Catherine gets his car. So Sebastian is trying to pursue Annette. Annette is frequently rebuffing him. She tells him that someone warned him about his reputation and said to stay away from him, which offends him. And after blackmailing various people for information, including a closeted gay classmate, Sebastian learns that the person who was telling the truth about him is, in fact, Cecile's mother, the girl Catherine initially wanted him to seduce at the beginning of the movie. So he decides, as some kind of revenge, he'll also follow through with Catherine's initial request to seduce Cecile, which he actually sexually assaults her. But the movie doesn't frame it that way, and that is a problem. But Cecile is actually in love with a guy named Ronald, who's played by Sean Patrick Thomas. And Ronald is her cello teacher, but I think he's a high schooler. Anyways, Sebastian, he continues to spend more time with Nanette under the guise of fulfilling what he calls his conquest. But then she's just like a normal person who doesn't blow smoke up his ass, basically. And he's wondering if he's actually falling in love with her. And at one point, they almost have sex, but then Sebastian doesn't go through with it because it's supposed to be this moral awakening. But then Nanette sees it as a rejection, and so they separate. But then he confesses his love to her, and then they actually have sex. And even though Sebastian has technically won his bet with Catherine, he doesn't want to have sex with Catherine because he's with Nanette now, and this upsets Catherine. So she tells Sebastian that he can't actually change because he's just as cruel as her, and is he really willing to sacrifice his reputation as a legendary womanizer, and it's only a matter of time before he ruins things with Nanette. And so Sebastian, because he has no integrity whatsoever, gets all in his head about this. He breaks up with Nanette. He tells Nanette he never actually loved her, which she accuses him of lying, and we're supposed to think that he's lying. And when he tells Catherine that he's done this, she laughs at him and says that it was her ultimate triumph to have made him feel ashamed of his own feelings. And it is her ultimate triumph to hold so much power over him. So he realizes he has made a mistake, and he tries to win Nanette back by giving her his journal, where he has documented all of his and Catherine's horrible behavior, but I guess he's also documented the process of falling in love with her. So I think that's also part of why he gives it to her. After he drops it off at her apartment, he waits outside her apartment all night. He's waiting for her to read it and forgive him. But then he leaves in the morning. She still hasn't come down yet. And as he's walking home, Ronald, who we have established earlier is in love with Cecile, finds Sebastian and is angry and says that he knows what happened between Sebastian and Cecile. And so the two of them start fighting right next to the street. And at this point, Nanette is walking towards them, presumably because she's looking for Sebastian, because I think we're supposed to think she's going to forgive him. And she tries to break up the fight, and in the process, she gets knocked down into the street. And seeing that she is about to get run over by a cab, Sebastian pushes her out of the way, so he gets hit by the car instead, and he dies. And then in the final moments of the movie, Catherine, who is the student body president, delivers the opening address at their school, which I think is also a memorial service for Sebastian. And she's talking about how much she cared for him and she couldn't save him from being self-destructive, but she is interrupted when copies of Sebastian's journal get distributed to everyone. And so the big reveal is, look at all the shitty things Catherine did and Sebastian documented, and now we all know how evil she is. And then the movie ends with Nanette driving Sebastian's Jaguar car down the highway, and she's wearing his sunglasses, and she has his journal, and her hair is blowing like crazy. The end. I said sex so many times.
I mean, you have to.
I know.
Okay, listening to that synopsis, I was thinking two things. One, I was thinking about the most unforgivable aspect of this movie for me. I'm just like joking. There are so many unforgivable aspects, okay? But they use this really beautiful Counting Crows song. Like, it's one of my favorite songs.
We'll talk about it.
And I hate it when really like beautiful and obviously romantic and well-written songs are like misapplied in movies. But the makers of this film would not think it was misapplied because this is supposed to be a romance.
Yeah, right.
Two, I think the most redeeming quality that this movie gives us is, and I remember this was 1999, so the bar was like very low, is that at least it acknowledges that racism exists.
Yes.
While I was watching it, I was surprised that that was something that came up.
Yes. Cecile's mom, who is played by theater legend Christine Baranski, when she has that line where she's like, I can't be racist. We gave money to Colin Powell. Like, I was dying. It was good.
That was actually a pretty good scene. And he's like, I went to Juilliard.
Yeah, she's acting like he was some charity case. And he's like, no, I live on whatever street. Again, I don't know New York geography, so street names mean nothing to me. But the assumption is supposed to be that he's much more affluent than she realizes.
He said he went to Juilliard at some point, though, too, I think.
He's pre-Juilliard.
Pre-Juilliard, that's what
So that's why I think he's still in high school.
Yeah, that confused me.
Because he's technically a teacher because he's giving her cello lessons. But I don't think he's an adult.
He's very clearly a grown man.
He's 25 playing high schoolers. For the most part.
Yeah. What a wild time. Anyway, on to our origin stories. I, first of all, really love that Marin, when you announced that we were going to be watching this movie, that you coined it a trash film. You're like, this is trash. This is total trash. And I felt really refreshing to watch something that I did not have mixed feelings about. I knew that this wasn't going to be good, but I am very, very curious to hear your origin story about it, because you were 1, right? You would have been 1 year old when this came out. So what inspired you to watch this movie? How did that happen?
Okay, so my journey with this film began in a way that I'd imagine a lot of adolescent journeys began for people of my generation, in terms of discovering new media for the first time, especially media of another era. Meaning, I was on my family's shared desktop computer, dicking around on a little website called www.youtube.com. I don't know how I ended up where I ended up. But I loved movies for a really long time. There were other movies of this era that I was really obsessed with. I was super obsessed with 10 Things I Hate About You. So maybe it got recommended to me through perpetually rewatching clips of that movie. I was also really obsessed with Reese Witherspoon because I loved Legally Blonde. And I was especially obsessed with the movie Walk the Line, where she plays June Carter Cash. I watched that movie so much as a kid. So maybe they were like, here's more Reese Witherspoon content. This remains a mystery. But at some point, I was probably 11 or 12. Okay. So relatively young. I was recommended this video called Cruel Intentions Love Scene. And then in parentheses, it said, with Swedish sub.
With what?
With Swedish sub. Like, there were Swedish subtitles.
What? Okay.
This video.
So specific.
I know, and it's burned in my memory. This video does not exist anymore. I tried to find it, and this specific video does not exist anymore, which I'm honestly really sad about. And I can't remember what the thumbnail was that would have compelled me to click on it. But what this scene was the scene with the Counting Crows song.
No way! Damn it!
Which is, okay, so it is the sex scene between Nanette and Sebastian. And it's set to this Counting Crows song, which is such a beautiful song. Okay, I don't know what this movie is. I don't know who these characters are. I don't know what arc they have been on. I don't know where they are going, okay? I'm just seeing them bathed in this gorgeous, soft yellow light. And their bodies are really close together. And their kissing is very soft. And there's lots of nose touching. And it's set to this beautiful song. And it blew my fucking mind. Okay? It was a transformative moment for me. Not in the way you might expect, in that oftentimes when you recount these childhood memories of watching sex scenes, it's this sexual awakening where you're like, oh my God, I got horny and it was so wild. And that was not what was happening. I guess the phrase I would use to describe it would be emotionally horny. In my sex ed, in my very Catholic school, I had always been told sex is this expression of intense emotion and love between two people. And I was always confused by that, because you're telling me this, but you're also describing this act that I've never experienced, that I've never seen, that I don't fully understand, that honestly seems weird and awkward. So how could it be this expression of love? And I'm watching this scene, devoid of any other context surrounding it. That is very important. But I'm watching this scene and it clicks. Where I'm like, oh, this is what intimacy could be. Intimacy was not the word I would have latched onto at the time, but in hindsight, that is the word I can apply to it. Which, Maggie, you knowing me in my life personally, you know that like these displays of like intimacy and tenderness, they're catnip for me. And then, of course, I watch other scenes. I watched the kiss scene between Selma Blair and Sarah Michelle Gellar and was like, whoa, also mind-blowing. But I couldn't watch the movie anywhere because this was before we had streaming. And I couldn't just go to Blockbuster and ask my parents to rent this very R-rated, very sexual movie. Eventually, when I watched it, it was a few years later at that point. So the scene was just, it was deep in there. Not
with Swedish subtitles.
With Swedish subtitles. And I remember the summer before my freshman year of high school, my parents finally got Netflix streaming on our computer. And I remember Cruel Intentions on there and being like, oh my God, I can finally watch this movie. And I remember having to turn it off because my mom would come in the room or whatever, and I didn't want her to know what I was watching because she wouldn't have wanted me to watch it. And I remember watching it and being like, wait, what? I was so repulsed by him. The build up to the scene, there was not the same payoff anymore.
Yeah.
But there is still this little part of me that when he is driving on the highway and the first piano notes of that song start to play, my heart starts pounding a little bit. It just does. I can't help it. I cannot help it. And so now, being an adult watching this movie, obviously it is trash in its messaging, okay? It is riddled with violence, most of which the film doesn't actually even conceive of as being violence. Some of it is played for laughs. The ending is super moralistic and wacky in terms of who gets to be a hero, who gets to be redeemed, who gets to be shamed, who is actually in the wrong. But also, this film is trash that makes me ascend to a higher plane of existence. In that I am thoroughly entertained pretty much the entire time. I am often laughing when they don't want me to be laughing, but sometimes I'm actually laughing when they want me to be laughing. I think generally people's performances are like perfectly calibrated to what this is. I have so much fun watching this movie, even though it is not good in ways that are very, very substantial. And so I want to get into that. But like, I could probably watch this movie once a week for the rest of my life and just be so entertained by it. And it all started with that sex scene and the Counting Crows song.
But it sounds like you've Pavloved yourself into
Yes.
loving it a little bit. You have like this positive association to it, which, I mean, it was a part of your coming of age.
Right.
Honestly, and understanding your understanding of intimacy.
Yes.
And then having that unwound when you actually saw the full picture, which metaphorically, unfortunately, is so true of the experience of girlhood in general. I'm sorry that this has happened to you, but also I'm glad that you're able to, it brings you joy. Or at least you're entertained. I don't know, maybe joy isn't the right word. I feel like joy is a deep, there's a deep richness to.
Yeah, it's not
quite that.
I wouldn't say this film is nourishing, you know, but it's
It's junk food.
It is junk food.
Yeah.
It like, oh, and it's they don't make, which on one level, when you said earlier, good, they don't make them like this anymore, but they don't make trash this good anymore.
Well, that's what I say about reality TV.
Right, okay.
It's the same thing. It's the same exact thing. Reality TV in the early 2000s and in like the 90s, starting with The Real World, it's just not the same because it's so scripted now. The makers are so much more self-aware of what is being portrayed and how the audience is going to either accept or not accept what is happening. And it's an algorithm. Everything, I think, is so systemized. Whereas in the 90s, Roger Kumble was just like, let's fucking do this. And there was like, okay.
Yeah, and we're going to get a bunch of really young, hot, famous people to be in it. And Sarah Michelle Gellar was at, I don't remember what year Buffy started airing, but she was already catapulted into fame at this point because of Buffy. And I'm pretty sure this movie was why I eventually watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
I mean, Sarah Michelle Gellar, and what a story. Her and Freddie Prinze Jr. I will randomly look up pictures of them because it makes me happy to just see them together. They seem like relatively normal people. Right. Maybe they're horrible. But I just think anyone in Hollywood who's able to make a marriage last must have some degree of humanity left over, even after all those years in such a toxic culture.
And to add to the unraveling of my like romantic projections onto this one specific scene, of course, after I watched it for the first time and was like, what is this movie? I need to know more. And then I learned that Ryan Phillippe and Reese Witherspoon were together at the time and were together for like a decade and had 2 kids together, and then they got divorced. I all learned that in a matter of minutes, and it kind of shattered me. But just look up Ryan Phillippe's Wikipedia page and just read about various things that have been alleged about him. And I'll just leave it at that. But I think Reese
alleged.
Right. I don't want him to sue me. If God forbid he listens to this, you got to say alleged so they don't sue you for defamation.
What? I mean,
because he settled them out of court, so he was never found guilty of anything in a court of law. He seems like a jackass. That's all I'm going to say. He seems like a jackass who abuses his girlfriends.
He's defamed his own character by being an asshole.
Right.
I'm not a Reese Witherspoon stan by any means. I don't dislike her. I'm pretty neutral about it. But I would 100% take her side.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, 1, the patriarchy. But 2, she seems to really care about making movies that help women. I think she's probably a pretty normal person as far as...
She's super fucking rich.
Yeah. So, like, how normal can you be? Or I don't think richness equals a lack of morality necessarily.
Except for these people.
Except for the people in this movie. Yeah, and billionaires. Anyway, okay, this is off topic.
Yeah. Your origin story.
My origin story, I watched this probably around the time it came out. So I was exposed to this. We were the same age, though, when we would have been. When you were exposed to the scene with the Swedish subtitles. Yeah. I can't imagine it was something that I saw in theaters because I would have been like 11.
Right.
So
it's a very R-rated movie.
Yeah. But my dad has been known to take us to movies that later he was like, well, probably shouldn't have done that. Just historically. Oh, man. What is that? Shit. I wish I could remember what it was called. But he definitely took my older sister to this movie. Species.
I've never heard of this.
Okay, well, maybe we should watch it. I have to rewatch it because I don't remember exactly, but should not have taken her. I saw Braveheart in theaters. I was probably 7 or 8. I don't know.
That movie is so violent.
Yeah, like, it's one of my earliest movie-going memories. He just liked to go to movies with us, and so I've always been willing to engage with whatever is put in front of me, film-wise, and do my best to interpret it. I can tell you, when I first saw this, there's no doubt in my mind I believed in the romance of it because this movie was made for my generation. These are the messages we were being sent. Although the stepbrother, stepsister thing, even I could never get over it. Even now, I can't get over it. It's weird. It's fucking weird. It's so strange, like culturally, how we would even be able to accept that as, not necessarily accept it, period, but accept it as normal and not a kind of like deviant behavior. Given that you don't need to share DNA to be family, I feel like that seems obvious. Although they seem very particularly void of normal human empathy.
Right.
So it kind of makes sense in that regard.
There are scenes where their banter, if you could call it that, is kind of good. They have actual chemistry. And that adds to the discomfort. And then at the end, when she says, you don't love me anymore, you love her now, and she seems actually upset, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm feeling in that moment, but I'm feeling something complicated.
I know that the phrase or the term suspending disbelief, like it doesn't quite fit, but I can never quite buy that they just want to have sex with each other because they're brother and sister. You can put the step in front of it all you want. Their parents have sex. If your parents have sex with each other, how could you have sex with...
He's just obsessed with sex. That's what he tells his therapist in the first scene.
Oh my God. Okay. Thank you for reminding. This is random. That opening scene, Sebastian talking to his therapist, and his therapist is clearly thinks he's an asshole and not really interested in what he has to say. And she knows this. He ends up leaving the room after the session, and the therapist's daughter calls her up crying. And it turns out Sebastian has, I can't think of like a verb for it. I was going to say cybercrimed, but it's a sex crime. I think it's fair to
That's
call
why
it a sex crime.
That's why I opened my summary with he commits cyber and sex crimes.
Yeah.
He does that multiple times in this movie.
He convinced her, his therapist's daughter, to allow him to take naked photos of her, and then he put them on the internet. Mm-hmm. He just did this for fun, and because his therapist was overcharging him, is what he says. Okay, but so as all of this is happening, he is leaving, and the building that he's in, it's even strange. She's up on a balcony.
It looks like a mall.
It looks like a mall. That's what I was going to say. And I don't know that it's supposed to be a mall. Maybe it's supposed to be one of those corporate malls, you know?
Yeah.
But there are just so many people walking by. It just seems to be a mall. And she's yelling at him from the balcony. And it's just so unhinged and surreal that it really reminded me of the scene in Vampire's Kiss where Nicolas Cage is just absolutely fucking unhinged in his therapist's office. And he starts reciting the alphabet. So if you've ever seen that, if you haven't seen it, please watch that. I don't think it really wouldn't make sense for us to talk about it on this podcast, but it is a must fucking watch. You can probably just Google that scene too and watch it on YouTube. It's worth a watch. Anyway, so that was a random intertextuality I did want to bring up. And I don't have anything to say about it. There's no critique of it, but there's something very similar in what's happening.
That scene is really fascinating because we're immediately privy to the fact that he is pretending to care, pretending to have these breakthroughs with his therapist. We're supposed to already tell that's an artifice. And then after he leaves the office, the camera stays on the therapist and she mutters to herself, what a schmuck. And so on one level, this movie understands exactly who he is. But then they try to redeem him. And it's just not developed enough that it feels genuine whatsoever. It's one of those things where he is such a despicable character that you can't really win either way with regards to his death. Because on one level, I'm like, yeah, he needed to go. The world is better without him. I get Nanette knew him for 5 days and she loved him. Whatever. But by the end of the movie, she seems like she's fine. But he needed to go. And I don't think he deserves this happily ever after. But also by killing him, it paints him as this tragic hero The only way for this character arc to feel organic or to have any kind of internal logic is for him to just end the movie alone, and he's just forced to reckon with the mess he has made. But teens don't want that. They want Ryan Phillippe and Reese Witherspoon making love to Counting Crows.
I want that too. And I... Isn't that what we all want? Going back to the beginning where we were like, did she not want to have premarital sex, or did she not want to have sex until she was in love with somebody? Because I do think that it's not quite clear which one it is. If we assume that maybe it was just that she didn't want to have sex until she knew she was really in love, then having sex with him she hasn't actually made any personal moral sacrifices to be with him, which I think impacts both her and his character arc. It makes it less important in a way. If she didn't want to have sex until she was in love, then she's done that. She's lived up to her own sense of virtue, and he has respected that virtue. Ew, am I like, God, ew. I didn't mean to, you know what I mean, though?
I was actually thinking about this, and I was thinking about how this is the first movie we've talked about where our lead protagonist is not a girl. Our lead protagonist is a boy. Because he is our entry into the movie. He is the character we are with the most. It is about his journey, ultimately, and the way the girls revolve around that. And I was thinking about this under the assumption that she wanted to wait until she was married to have sex. And the reason I think it might be that is because in the article she writes, she mentions that she has a boyfriend. I don't remember his name. We never meet him. And they've been together for a year, and he's fine waiting. Which I'm like, if you've been together for a year, you're probably in love with him. So that's why I'm wondering if it was marriage. If it's that she wants to wait until marriage. She has already been in love once. And then the movie wants us to believe she has fallen in love for a second time. And this second time, she went ahead and decided that she was ready to have sex. So she had sex with him. But his arc is that he is falling in love for the first time. And I don't know, because if it's supposed to be a love story, it's about this magnitude of them mutually falling in love with each other, right? And this actually already brings in an intertextuality that I have. If we're looking at this film as the first film we've talked about where the main protagonist is actually a boy, but there are more female characters than male characters, and it's still depicting girlhood in a way. I thought about this essay by Gia Tolentino, who she is a staff writer at The New Yorker, but she has also published a book of essays called Trick Mirror: Essays on Self-Delusion. Phenomenal book. Highly recommend. She wrote it in like 2017, 2018, so it already exists as this interesting historical artifact of what essays and criticism were like right after Trump was elected. The prose is just super lucid, and a lot of her ideas are still just like very sharp, and I think they hold up really well. And she has this essay called Pure Heroines, which is charting the evolution between girl characters, adolescent girl characters, and then woman characters in fiction. So she's surveying these different eras of literary history, talking about classic children's literature, and she talks about a lot of dystopian young adult literature that was really popular in the 2010s, and then these common conceptions of women in contemporary adult fiction. And she talks about so many things in this essay. It's really, really good. I can't do it justice by trying to describe it, but she makes some comparisons between how she feels girl characters are depicted, adolescent girls, etc., versus their male counterparts. And she says, men were expected to reach beyond their circumstances, while women were expected to be defined and bounded by theirs. I think what I was trying to get at earlier with this question of Annette wanting to wait until she's married, but then changing her mind, and him falling in love for the first time, is that even though she makes this choice for herself to change her values, which is a very normal thing to do, is a very important part of being a person and becoming an adult, is reevaluating what you believe and how you want to behave. Even though she does that, she is still always defined as the girl who finally got Sebastian to fall in love. Because his whole thing is that he has sex with all these girls and he maybe tells them that he loves them, but he doesn't actually love them, and he just has sex with them once and then moves on to the next girl, right?
Hey, it's editing Marin here from the future, and I just wanted to clarify what I just said in the episode, because I don't think I actually got to the point I was trying to make, which is that the crux of the movie is that Sebastian gets to, as Tolentino says in her essay, quote, reach beyond his circumstances. So Sebastian gets to realize there is a life beyond being a playboy and being emotionally insincere. And by falling in love with Annette, he gets to transcend his circumstances. And we, as the audience, are meant to be moved by that. Meanwhile, Annette is also technically reaching beyond her circumstances in realizing that maybe having sex outside of marriage is the right decision for her, is a change that she is able to make in her life because it is the right decision for her. But I don't think the movie puts their transformations on equal footing. I don't even know if the movie sees her as undergoing a transformation. I think it maybe only sees him as undergoing a transformation. And so Annette remains defined by Sebastian's ability and willingness to reach beyond his previous circumstances. It's not that she was the girl who knew herself enough to change her mind, but that she was the girl who got him to change his mind. Hopefully that makes a lot more sense. Okay, back to the episode. Thank you so much. Bye.
The way that is the central conceit of the movie is really annoying. It's interesting to see a movie that has these rich questions about girlhood on the sidelines in favor of this boy in the center who is such a mess. The journey that Annette is going on, that is interesting in terms of, I'm going to change my beliefs for this person, and why should I trust him? The movie doesn't really give us a reason to understand why she trusts him, but she does.
I think that's why, though, I like the idea of thinking that she didn't go back on her own morals for him. And I also think it's odd that both of us had a question, that there wasn't that clarity there. And for me, the lack of clarity comes from the first conversation she has with Sebastian, and they're at his aunt's house and they're walking up the stairs, and she says something along the lines of, why is it so wrong, to maybe not want to have sex until like you're in love with somebody? Like, she uses in love instead of marriage.
She says, I don't want to experience the act of love until I am in love.
Okay.
Or without being in love or something like that. But that is sort of the central idea that it's all couched in, is this notion of being in love.
And so to that effect, I think that she is in love with him, and so far as teenagers fall in love,
right,
with each other.
And I thought about this because we have been such ardent defenders of the ever after they fell in love and got married in 5 days, or Romeo and Juliet, where it's like, yes, I believe that you have seen each other for 10 seconds and are madly in love with each other. And so I thought about that and was like, the verdict on this show is teenagers can fall in love instantly.
Sure.
But with him, I don't know.
I don't doubt she's in love with him.
Yeah.
My problem with it is that he is a serial sexual abuser of women. And we're supposed to forgive those crimes because he's fallen in love.
Right.
That's not fucking adding up, Roger Kumble. He didn't have to actually change. This is getting into my intertextuality a little bit, but say what you're going to say.
I think you're right. I do believe she fell in love with him. I believe that he fell in love with her. Within the fantasy of the movie, I buy it. But when I transpose that to actual life, to an actual 18-year-old boy, I'm like, no. I said earlier, when those opening piano notes of the Counting Crows song play, I get heart palpitations. I can't help it. I've been indoctrinated, okay? And that scene, it is very well done in terms of this expression of intimacy between these two people who are in love with each other. But you just can't separate it from the fact that he is the devil.
He's a horrible person. That scene, it doesn't have the same resonance for me just because I'm sure because I did not have the same kind of
encounter.
Yes. And so to me, when I watch that scene, when they're having sex and he asks her if she's okay, that just pisses me off because I know that the film wants us to see that moment as a moment of redemption for him. Oh, because finally he's not raping a woman. Let's give him a pat on the fucking back. He's wondering if she's okay. Because I think the film does understand and the reason why he says it and why it's such an important part of that scene is that he was not concerned about his sexual partner's experiences in the past, ever. Not one time. Not only did he not care about them, but he often raped them or committed cyber sex crimes against them continuously.
That was another moment when I was watching that scene for the first time as a child, and he said that, and I lost it. But you're right. You're totally right. It's one of those things where we're meant to applaud him for doing the bare fucking minimum. Mm-hmm. Except he can't even really do the bare minimum because when he drops off his journal to Nanette so she knows the whole truth about the bet and everything else that he's done, and he also writes her a letter. And in that letter, does he actually say the words, "I'm sorry"? No, he doesn't. Which, in our Ever After episode, I talked about how it was this profound moment that Prince Henry actually said, "I'm sorry," to Danielle. It's my own little test where it's, do you actually say, "I'm sorry"? And do you admit the harm you have caused? And he does admit the harm he has caused. Sebastian does. I can pull up the letter. "I don't know what I could possibly say that would rectify the harm I have caused you." But he doesn't actually say the words, "I'm sorry."
I don't think that he fully understands the harm that he's caused. He knows he's caused harm, but can he really articulate it fully?
Well, let's look at what he says. Now am I defending him? I don't know. Okay. Also, because I was thinking about this earlier today and I was like, I want to have that letter on hand because I might reference it. And so I just Googled Cruel Intentions Sebastian letter. And the first link that popped up was Tumblr.
Naturally. That fits.
And so this is a photo of my computer screen that is Tumblr, a Tumblr post. Okay. "Dear Annette, I don't know what I could possibly say that would rectify the harm I've caused you. The truth of the matter is that being with you was the only time I have ever been happy. My whole life has been a joke. I prided myself on taking joy in others' misery. Well, it finally backfired. I succeeded in hurting the first person I loved. Enclosed is my most prized possession, my journal. For a long time, I considered it my trophy, a sordid collection of my conquests. If you really want to know the truth, then please read it. No more lies. Please give me another chance. I'm a wreck without you."
Oh, wow.
So he makes it about him at the end.
Yes. Well, even from the beginning, he's like, "You make me happy." Ugh. Anyway, and I can imagine myself at 11 or 12 years old seeing that scene and thinking, oh, he's so sweet. He really cares about her. Because that's what we're conditioned to believe. And I mean, the bar is on the fucking floor still I would say men's behavior hasn't changed as much as, or as quickly as, women have become aware of the importance and the absolute necessity of having higher expectations for them.
I think you are 100% correct.
So I'm not saying that things are exactly the same, right? But there's an imbalance there in our progress.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to bring in your intertextuality?
Sure.
Since you mentioned it.
Yeah. My intertextuality is the very famous book by Emily Brontë called Wuthering Heights, first published in 1847. I haven't finished it. I'm only 2/3 of the way through. So I told Marin earlier, no spoilies. It's only been out for 150 odd years. I still need some time to see how it ends. But there are some glaring parallels between this book and this film. To really put it very simply, at the center of our story are these two characters, Heathcliff and Catherine. And Heathcliff was adopted by Catherine's father. So they are, in this sense, they're siblings. They're adopted. He was adopted. They're siblings. But they're in love with each other. And okay, if you haven't read Wuthering Heights, I'm about to give you some spoilies, I guess. Not all the way to the end, but they do get to make out a lot. And then she dies the next day, I think, within like days.
Well, she does marry a whole other person. She opts for financial comfort and status in a husband over, quote unquote, true love. She marries a different man. And that makes Heathcliff really mad.
That's true. I did leave that part out.
When she is dying, Heathcliff comes to visit her.
Yes. Yeah. While her husband is away. And then he arrives and it's a whole fucking thing. She marries this other man who is a better man in comparison to Heathcliff, who is pretty horrible. Again, it's 1847, so bar is even lower than it was in 1999. I have to explain one other quick thing because of the quote that I want to use. Catherine's husband's sister, Isabella, ends up marrying Heathcliff. Yes, so even that feels a little incestual. But there's not a lot of people. They live in the country. Who are you going to marry? I'm not going to judge her for that. Isabella ends up marrying Heathcliff. She's quite young. They're like all teenagers too at the time. And in a letter that she writes to her servant, Ellen, the entire story is told to us through Ellen, through the letters that she receives and through her conversations with the other characters. Isabella writes Ellen a letter while she's still living there. She does later leave Heathcliff. She writes the letter and says, please come. You need to come here. And so Ellen does go to the house and she visits with Heathcliff. And this is what Heathcliff says about her. He says, she degenerates into a mere slut, which is wild that the word slut was being used in 1847. I don't know why that was shocking to me, which was shocking to people in 1847 as well. She is tired of trying to please me, uncommonly early. You'd hardly credit it, but the very morrow of our wedding, she was weeping to go home. However, she'll suit this house so much the better for not being over nice, and I'll take care she does not disgrace me by rambling abroad. What is interesting to me about this, not really surprising, but interesting, is how often men will frame their bad behavior not in terms of how they are hurting the other person or in wanting to frame it as if it's the other person's fault, although that is often either on the surface or very blatant or the subtext of whatever they're saying. But his primary concern is his reputation. And that I see play out over and over again in the world. Myself and a lot of my friends have experienced that with these men who ultimately their main concern is just what other people think about them because reputation matters, because that is how they maintain power. That is how the patriarchy operates. It needs its reputation or it crumbles. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. by putting this in conversation with Hannah Gadsby's absolutely amazing Netflix special, Nanette, which when I went back to watch the parts of this I wanted to pull the quotes from, I saw that Joe Rogan has yet another comedy special on Netflix. And that instantly made me feel like whatever progress we think we've made, we haven't. It's called Burn the Boats or something like that, which just, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it's bigoted and racist and sexist and full of dog whistles, if not just blatant horribleness. Anyway, fuck you, Joe Rogan. What Hannah Gadsby does so brilliantly is technically it's a comedy special, but Hannah Gadsby is flipping the way that comedians use tension. So typically comedians will build tension and then release it with a laugh. But Hannah Gadsby instead builds the tension and then makes the audience sit with it. After this sort of reflex of tension and release and tension and release up until the end, just forces the audience to sit with their words. In this part of the special, it's towards the end, and they're listing off men who have proven themselves to be dangerous to women. Okay? So they say, they're all cut from the same cloth. Donald Trump, Pablo Picasso, Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, Woody Allen, Roman Polanski. These men are not exceptions. They are the rule. And they are not individuals. They are our stories. And so to connect this back to the film, Cruel Intentions, it expects us to forgive Sebastian on account of his eschewing his reputation, quote unquote, eschewing his reputation. But in death, he becomes victim somehow to his sister's cruelty, in which he was entirely complicit. Anyway, up until more or less one day before his hilarious death. Like, you know, like it's the entire fucking time. He maybe is a quote unquote good person, even in the movie for 24 hours. It's not a very long time that he's had this change of heart, okay? To return to Gadsby's words, and the moral of our story is we don't give a shit. We don't give a fuck about women or children. We only care about a man's reputation. What about his humanity? These men control our stories, and yet they have a diminishing connection to their own humanity. And then that quote is finished with the words, and we don't seem to mind so long as they get to hold on to their precious reputation. So the world doesn't care if men are connected to their humanity, their own sense of morality that actually considers other people. As long as their reputation is good, they're fucking good. Hence why Sebastian in real life, Ryan fucking Felipe, I will not say his name correctly.
On moral principle or just because you keep forgetting how to say it?
Both. TJ has corrected me many times.
Okay.
And I just refuse because I just think he doesn't really deserve it. Anyway, the point being, all it took for Sebastian's reputation to be repaired, and kind of the same thing in Ryan's real life, after sexually harassing and abusing women, not saying that he did that, just saying that it was alleged multiple times. All it took for his reputation to be repaired was for his sisters to be ruined by another woman and placed in a position of comparison. So now we're comparing his sister's reputation to his own. Even after death, he controls the narrative of her life and his. That is the problem with this fucking film.
I'm so glad you have taken us here, because the thing I find so fascinating about Catherine's character is that she precisely understands the exact thing that Gadsby is talking about in terms of how much men value their reputation. Because after Sebastian has slept with Nanette and he's in love with Nanette and he tells Catherine, yes, I had sex with her, but the bet is off. I don't want to have sex with you. I'm with her. I love her. Her mode of attack is to insult his masculinity, is to tell him, you were going to graduate a legend because you were going to have sex with this girl who claimed she wasn't going to have sex with anyone. You were going to graduate a legend and now you're going to be a loser because you're going to be weak and in love, essentially. And so she knows where exactly in our patriarchal framework to punch him. She's really smart. I don't think the movie ever denies that she's smart or that she understands deeply how the world works. Because her reputation is very different than Sebastian. Sebastian gets to be this very public womanizer, sex-obsessed boy. And she has this public persona of being perfect, being pristine, being clean-cut, whatever. And so that's why it's such a shock when it all comes down at the end when his journals get published. And she knows that the reason that she has to project this public image is because of a gender double standard. She has that whole speech about, God forbid I exude confidence and enjoy sex. Mm-hmm. I'm the Marsha fucking Brady of the Upper East Side, and sometimes I want to kill myself. And so she says things like that. She knows exactly where to prey on Sebastian's insecurities in terms of the most shameful thing he could be as a teenage boy in love, which that is cruel of her. It's part of that white feminism framework where she's making patriarchy beneficial for her own malicious enjoyment. But the fact that she's so shrewd is what makes it so frustrating. The way the film spins the ending of just her being the villain and he, because he outed her, like he suddenly isn't held responsible for any of the things they both did anymore. Because yes, she is cruel. She didn't sexually assault Cecile, but she encouraged him to prey upon her. And then when Cecile comes to Catherine and is like, your brother took advantage of me, Catherine totally downplays it and is like, oh, but you had an orgasm and you should actually just fuck him all the way because that's what people do. She's enabling his bad behavior in that moment, his violent behavior, I should say. So I'm not saying she should also be redeemed, but she understands the cards that have been given to her are different than the cards that have been given to him by the world. You know, so the way the movie just pins everything on her at the end, it's just so bizarre and stupid.
And true, though, to the way the world operates.
Exactly.
Gadsby says at the end of this quote that I've been talking about, fuck reputation, hindsight is a gift. I think what they're getting at, and also what we're talking about here, is that Catherine and women in general are not really given the gift of hindsight. We don't have the freedom, we're not given the grace to look back and say, we've made a mistake and now we can do better. Whereas men are able to look back and say that they've made a mistake. And that's actually all they have to do. Oftentimes, they don't even actually have to change their behavior. They can just admit that they acknowledge their behavior was wrong, which is all Sebastian has done because he fucking dies before he can really show whether or not he has changed.
I think about specifically the ending of this movie. I want to talk about it in coordination with another intertext really quick. I have been reading Dangerous Liaisons, the book that this movie is a modern retelling of. I'm not very far in, but it's quite good. It's about the French aristocracy just being horrible, and it's told in letters, so that is very different in that there's no outside narrator moralizing anything, as was common in novels of this era, where you have this third-person narrator who is very clearly telling audiences what they should be feeling and what lessons they should be learning. So that's not here, which made it quite controversial. And so there's not that element that the film is able to employ through its characterization of Sebastian, where they're trying to get us to feel more favorably towards him. But I want to talk about the introduction essay in this edition, which is written by Alfred Mack Adam. He is a professor at Barnard College, Columbia University. This introduction focuses a lot on the historical context for the novel, but he said this, or he talked about this, which I thought was really interesting because I think the same thing has happened with the film in terms of our conception of the film versus what the film actually is. He says, the Marquise de Merteuil, which is the Catherine character, and the Vicomte de Valmont, which is the Sebastian character, are guilty of overweening pride, and it is the author's intention to bring them to justice. At the same time, in depicting their adventures, their clever machinations, and their utter hypocrisy, Laclos, that's the author of the novel, makes vice so seductive that moralizing critics damned his novel and sought to suppress it. The moral revulsion his book inspired continued through the 19th century and transformed it into a clandestine classic. Small wonder that so many quote-unquote private editions with suggestive illustrations appeared in the 19th and 20th centuries, including this translation, first published in 1898 by poet Ernest Dowson. It was reprinted many times with an array of provocative illustrations. The result is a baffling paradox. Laclos intended his novel as a condemnation of immorality. His critics, including judges in an 1842 Parisian court, considered it pornographic and banned it. Illustrators rendered it truly pornographic with lascivious pictures. Their confusion is perfectly understandable because it is often difficult to know if Laclos is a serious moralizer or merely a purveyor of the salacious. And so when I think about this movie as a whole, and its reputation, to use that word, as this very sexual, graphic, naughty, bratty, shocking, provocative being. That's often how we think about it because it's these teenagers talking very frankly about sex and being very manipulative when it comes to sex. I was around in 1999, but I wasn't conscious of the reception because I was an infant. But, you know, I'd imagine this movie was quite scandalous. I knew it was scandalous even when I first watched it because I knew I didn't want my mom to know I was watching it. That is the atmosphere surrounding it, is that it is this scandalous movie, just like that was the atmosphere surrounding the book. But then there was also this question of, actually, though, is this book trying to impart something very morally conservative in depicting this ruthlessness and intense sexuality? And it's this question that people had and they disagreed about. And I find the ending of this movie to be so conservative. Not conservative in the sense that Republicans are endorsing this movie for its values, but conservative in that the moral of the ending is about upholding these certain status quos, particularly pertaining to female sexuality. Because the person who suffers and is publicly shamed at the end of the movie is Catherine, who has said that she just enjoys having sex with whoever. She doesn't need to be in love. She doesn't need to be married. She doesn't even need to particularly like the person. She'll do it for manipulative reasons. But the baseline is just that, as she puts it, she enjoys sex for sex. And Annette, even though Annette has had sex outside of marriage, Annette still waited to have sex until she was in love with him. And because he dies, it's not like she had this breakup with him and she can say it was a mistake. It was that fate intervened and it was tragic. Because the movie wants us to think that if he hadn't died, they'd be together forever, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's this dichotomy where so much of the movie is about being scandalous and provocative in these ways that aren't necessarily conservative, though the way it treats, like we mentioned, assault and cybercrime and whatnot is not progressive. But then the end is so obsessed with this moral messaging that it's just so bizarre. But then even as this moral messaging is happening, when Bittersweet Symphony starts playing, I ascend to a higher plane of existence. I'm having so much fun, even though I fundamentally disagree with everything this ending wants me to believe. And it's just really confounding.
I would agree with that because it was kind of hard to get through because there is this voice inside of my head that is like, fuck, these are the messages that I was being sent as a young girl trying to understand my own sexuality and my own desire and what intimacy looked like. That's always disheartening to see. But I really did enjoy watching it. Again, because it's like junk food. And I do think what's interesting about having him die is because we are supposed to assume that him and Nanette would have lived happily ever after had he survived. This stupid fucking car accident. They could have just killed Catherine.
Right.
And I think it's interesting that they didn't. Okay. They could have just killed her, and then they could have actually lived happily ever after. Or it would have been super tragic to kill Annette, to have killed him and allow the women to survive. So Annette ends up being the one, truly, to bring Catherine down. And that is how he is ultimately absolved of his bad behavior. Because had he been alive, I think it just would have been too complicated. It would have been too difficult to absolve him.
Right. Okay, it's really interesting that you bring up these possible scenarios where other characters could die, because this is based on a novel. And so in the novel, the Sebastian character does die. So in the movie, he and Ronald are having an argument in the street, and that's how he ends up getting hit by the car. Since the book is set in aristocratic France, he and Ronald are dueling with swords, and Ronald kills him. And before he dies, he tells Ronald to publish his letters. And in the book, the Annette character also dies because she is so overcome with grief at his betrayal. So that has been totally retconned. And I think it is to heighten this redemption for Sebastian and to heighten the fact that this is supposed to be a love story at its core. But then the fact that Catherine still lives is also interesting. There's no neat way to categorize it. I still stand by my argument that Catherine is punished more for the way she inhibits her sexuality, and Nanette is not punished for the way she inhibits her sexuality, because the way they do that is different.
With him dying, like I said, it puts Catherine in a position to be compared to Annette in a way that it wouldn't happen otherwise. I'm going to be honest, Catherine seems really fucking cool.
Exactly.
I would want to be her. I'm sure when I was watching this at like 11 or 12, I was like, oh, that's who I want to be when I grow up. I don't want to be Annette. I want to be Catherine.
No one wants to. I shouldn't say no one wants to be Annette. I'm sure there were people in 1999 who found Ryan Phillippe really attractive. I personally don't understand it.
Same.
But,
don't get it.
But that leads me into my question that I want to ask you about this film's current legacy, which is that it is considered a cult classic in the very standard definition of what a cult classic is. And it has a very strong following. For its 20th anniversary, it was re-released in theaters, so there's enough interest in it that they were able to do that. And the thing I was thinking about, and this is a very general statement, but I feel pretty strong about its accuracy, and I think it's pretty easy to gather this just from being a person online, is that in 2024, the most ardent fans of this movie belong to the groups of people who are potentially most negatively impacted by the messages in this movie. Like, you go on the internet and you will find gay men being like, the L in LGBT stands for let Sarah Michelle Gellar say F slur. They fucking love her in this movie. They love this movie. And a lot of women really love this movie. I don't know if I could say I love this movie, but I've said before, I find it so watchable. I find it so entertaining. Yet at the same time, I'm totally aware of and can talk about very intricately the ways this film is perpetuating rape culture. Why has that happened, do you think? Is it just because we're able to see through it and flip it on its own head and appreciate it for its ridiculousness?
I think that's part of it. I think there are two things happening. One, like you said, we're able to see through it. But I also, when I'm watching things with TJ that are obviously problematic and violent against women, I typically have an easier time engaging with it than he does. And I think it's because I'm used to it. That's a big part of it. I'm definitely used to it. But also in those scenarios, I'm being depicted as the victim. And there's a different kind of violence to having to see yourself as a perpetrator over and over and over again. And obviously, there's also a kind of violence in seeing yourself as a victim over and over and over again. But that is almost impossible to escape if you're going to engage in any kind of media where women exist, which is most media. To see myself being victimized, well, this has happened to me in real life, and I know that I can survive it. And so there's a level of desensitization. I'm not saying it's healthy or okay. I'm just saying I truly think that that's what's happening. Whereas if you're repeatedly seeing yourself as a perpetrator, it's a different kind of violence to see yourself as hurting a person that you love because you're projecting, right? Like when I'm watching this, I'm seeing women, I see myself in them. When he's watching, he sees the men, he sees himself in them.
That's really insightful.
I think that's part of it. And to go off of that, too, the second thing is that it is so fun to watch because Sarah Michelle Gellar's character, she's performing into this hyper feminine, but also hypersexualized state that I find intriguing and attractive. And the same thing for what's his face? Dawson's Creek guy. Wasn't he in Dawson's Creek?
Joshua Jackson with his bleach blonde hair, which if you've seen Dawson's Creek, you know that in the opening episode of season 2, Pacey gets frosted tips. Why is that? It's because the summer before they started shooting season 2 of Dawson's Creek, he starred in Cruel Intentions where he had bleach blonde hair.
Oh my God.
I wasn't going to bring it up because I don't really think anyone who listens to this show cares about Dawson's Creek the way I do. But yes, Pacey from Dawson's Creek is in 2 scenes in this movie.
I was surprised you hadn't mentioned it because I was thinking about it this whole time. And the way that he's being depicted as well, there's something about him being this gay character who has sex very openly and doesn't care.
And is okay blackmailing other gay people because he's rich. I can't help but assume that's part of it, is he's rich in the way that these other characters are. And as a result of that, he doesn't have that kind of moral fiber. So even though he belongs to an oppressed class, he doesn't give a fuck about other people who are in that group.
And maybe what feels good about watching them is these characters live into themselves fully is because they are using the power that they have and they don't feel bad about it. And that feels really good to see, even if the way that they're using it hurts other people. Because I am not good at being assertive. Whatever power I have, I'm not always good at utilizing it because I'm afraid of who it might hurt. Even if what I'm trying to do is good, my intentions are good and morally sound. And so there's something empowering, I think.
Those are all really insightful things to say that I hadn't thought of. Because sometimes I'm like, is the pleasure I experience watching this movie reflective of some moral failing on my own part? And I don't think it is. Mm-mm. Pretty much everything I ever watched as a kid, if I go back and revisit it, I realize there were bad things I internalized from it. Like Dawson's Creek, for example, which is one of my favorite shows ever. That show is so special to me because of the period when I first watched it and the way I responded to it. So when you think about, okay, pretty much everything I watched was fucked up in some way, or most of the things I read were fucked up in some way, and they contributed to me internalizing things that I probably shouldn't have internalized, and I had to do a lot of work to exorcise them from my body, my mind. But I also think that that process of reevaluating what you once loved, what you once knew, that's just a fundamental part of being a person. That is a really productive way to access your innermost humanity and consider it. And so while I don't think we should continue making media for children and young adults that propagates harmful messages, I don't think we should write off the media that did do that necessarily. Because if you are to do the important work of living and self-reflection, you'll eventually, through reevaluating that media, come to better understand the future you want to contribute to making. I don't want girls watching this and romanticizing Sebastian, but they're probably gonna. And then 10 years later, I can only hope that they'll rewatch it and realize something different. And I think that's maybe just part of being a person when you are trapped in the patriarchal hellscape that we live in.
Yeah. And to return to what I was saying, there are these harmful messages. Yes, they're horrible. It's riddled with it. It's trash. But you still get to see, you still have this gay character and this female character, and they're both living into their sexualities, and they have no shame about their sexualities. And that feels good to see. And I think that's what's really resonating with us and with the people who still enjoy it. Yeah. And I think I feel similarly about Miller's Girl. I know we had a disagreement about the level of self-awareness, but I do think that Miller's Girl is much more self-aware than like Cruel Intentions.
I don't disagree. I think in the ways that matter the most, Cruel Intentions is not self-aware in terms of, oh, he gave Cecile alcohol without telling her it was alcohol and then coerced her into taking her clothes off. This is funny, not sexual assault. Mm-hmm. That lack of self-awareness, not good. I think the movie is self-aware in its understanding of how ridiculous this world is in terms of like 1% of Upper East Side. There are moments in this movie that are just so stupid that I'm convinced they know it's dumb. But then the movie, when it comes to this attempts at this sincere romantic arc, the movie thinks it is being sincere. The movie is being sincere, but it doesn't realize that it has not put in any of the work to make it come off as sincere. I guess I agree with you.
I don't think this movie knows what the fuck it is like really saying or doing in terms of like its bad messaging or the ridiculousness even of rich people.
Yeah. I think maybe I'm just trying so hard to find a way to defend it because I, in a way, like it a lot.
You can like it, and
I know.
Bad. But you're in good company because a lot of people like it. I don't hate it. I was also entertained by it. When you picked this, I was happy to watch it again. And then it sent me down this road. I watched this other movie from the 90s. It was from 1998 called The Faculty.
Josh Hartnett.
Yes. And then you did put Bring It On the other day. It's nostalgic for me.
Could we also circle back to where we started with sex scenes? Because earlier you expressed your frustration with the use of the Counting Crows song. And then I had to talk about my own transcendent experience with the Counting Crows song, which now is inseparable from this scene in my brain. The thing I want to talk about is this anti-sex scene discourse, to use that buzzword, that exists in the world online, and it's resurged in the last couple years. And I haven't investigated this super thoroughly because I try to not be online very often, but more and more there are groups of people, often people younger than me. I will be 26 in 2 weeks, who are really against sex scenes in movies, period. They claim that they don't actually serve narrative purpose, or they think that they're somehow inherently exploitative of the actors who are in them. There's a lot of arguments I've seen floating around. I have yet to stumble upon one that I agree with. Because, yes, sex scenes can serve a narrative purpose.
Yeah. What?
And I want to acknowledge two things. I want to acknowledge that this high proliferation of sex scenes, coupled with a lack of discussion about asexuality as a concept, I can totally understand how, for someone who is asexual, that would be really alienating and frustrating and really difficult to deal with. And I also want to acknowledge that, yes, absolutely, there are films that have been made that have been unethical in the way they have filmed their sex scenes. There has been a lot more open conversation about how to make ethical sex scenes in the past couple years, in that a lot of more of just the general population are aware of things like intimacy coordinators and nudity clauses that actors have in their contracts, which very explicitly state what body parts can and cannot be shown. The notion of a closed set, I think a lot of people are aware of that now, and that's much more common practice where only people who actually need to be there to do the scene are allowed on set. The guy from craft services can't come and watch because he wants to see this hot actress half naked. I want to believe we're making progress in terms of these spaces where we're making these scenes not being exploitative. Obviously, my entry point into this movie was this sex scene, which, like I have said, was a very profound viewing experience for me. And as a child, sex scenes in literature and film, they were just this is a cheesy phrase, but they were a very safe space for me to explore my curiosity about sex, especially when I was at an age where I was curious about sex, but wasn't ready to have it, wasn't interested in having it. The idea of me having it still seemed like this very foreign concept that was very, very far away. But I knew one day I think I want to have it. So, like, what is this like? What does intimacy potentially look like? And the other thing that I remember about that video, Cruel Intentions love scene with Swedish sub, was that it had like millions of views, and the comments section was full of women talking about their first sexual experiences. Some of it was people talking about the movie where they're like, oh, like, this is so sweet. When he asked her if she's okay, that's so nice. And obviously we've talked about when you fit the scene within the whole movie, certain things perhaps become less romantic or whatever. But it was women talking about these positive experiences they'd had with sex and times that they felt safe or loved or it was just nice. And when I was 12, I really needed to read that. It was really important to me. So this idea that kids shouldn't have access to that, I really don't like it. I really disagree with that. Because also, a couple years ago, there was that whole controversy, or controversy is not even a strong enough word, but where expose about Pornhub, where they were hosting millions of videos from unverified users. Mm-hmm. So there was child porn, there was revenge porn, there was rape porn. Millions and millions of videos of that. I don't want kids watching that. I'd much rather they watch this Cruel Intentions sex scene on a loop for 2 years. And so I just wanted to say that because the more I thought about it, the more I realized how strongly I felt about it. While also acknowledging that within this same movie, while there was this sex scene that was very impactful for me to watch as a child, this movie has scenes that are depicting coercive and criminal sex in a way that disempowers people who have lived the experience that is being depicted. So I think we have a responsibility to treat sex scenes just as seriously as any other scene in any given text, both in how it's being crafted and how we're talking about it.
I definitely agree with all of that. And I mean, this film is sexy, though. I think some of the sexiest scenes really are between Sebastian and Catherine.
Yeah.
Those scenes are hot. It's fun to watch. That, like you said, that chemistry that they have. Mm-hmm. I think that sex scenes are important. Watching them when you're young. Because, okay, here would be my argument for it. If you're not actually watching people have sex, all you understand about sexuality then is these static images that are often very photoshopped and very unrealistic. And obviously there's movie magic and we're going to be filmed from a certain angle and blah, blah, blah. But at some point, you cannot hide the way the human body looks when it is in ecstasy, or when it is in like a certain position. And especially for women, it's helpful to know, oh, well, everyone's body looks like this. Or maybe everybody makes a face like this. Because how else are we finding that out? Not that we need to gauge our sexuality based on what sex looks like to other people, but I think it's really healthy and normal to be able to compare. And it also maybe will give you some ideas like, oh, maybe that feels good. Or I don't think I ever want to do that. I think in the same way as talking about people who menstruate, talking about menstruation is important. How else are we going to know, is this okay that I'm bleeding this much? Is this normal? Not talking about those things can be dangerous. And I think that is true of removing sex from movies. Like you mentioned, it gives women in particular an opportunity to have conversations about it. If nothing else, it's opening a door.
Because something I did appreciate about the Counting Crows sex scene, rewatching it as an adult, was one, how sweaty they are, and two, how hard they're breathing. Because I was like, yeah, it is like that. Even if you're not doing anything particularly wild, it is like that. And I definitely wasn't noticing that as a kid, but I was noticing the basic mechanics of what intercourse is when there's a penis and a vagina involved. And that was helpful for me as someone who was like, one day I will maybe be doing this.
The mechanics of it, I think, is educational, truly. I'm thinking about The Room, though. The mechanics of the way that they have sex in the room. He's having sex with her belly button, more or less, which if that's your thing, that's fine. But that's not really what's happening. No. His penis is meant to be in her vagina. And it very clearly is not. Right. If that's how you're doing sex, that's not real. So it's good to know how to do it, right?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Absolutely. Because this movie was such a core part of it's just that scene, really. I will always be grateful for this movie in a way because of that scene and just seeing it in the way I did. And that's just my truth, man.
That's a good truth. I'm glad that this movie did that for you.
What does this movie make you want to tell your younger self?
This movie makes me want to tell my younger self that it's okay to feel good about having any amount of power, not necessarily over other people, but over yourself and your own desires and your understanding of them. There's definitely a kind of power in understanding your own sexuality and what you want intimacy to look like, and that is a really positive thing. I think women are often shamed for knowing what they want in every way, not just sexually, but career-wise, or ambitious women are demonized. And I think that Catherine, for all her faults, was an ambitious fucking woman. So go for it. Because I was never going to be somebody who didn't care about other people. And honestly, I think Catherine still might have grown up to understand how she hurt people. But I also think with the power and balance of the patriarchy, I'm sorry, I just want to return for it quickly. Oftentimes, the people that she was hurting were men who probably, this is an estimate based on the world, but they probably weren't kind to her in different ways. I'm not saying that they deserved it, but maybe they did. Some of them. Obviously, she hurt a lot of women too, but it's okay to feel sure of yourself.
Yes. And it's okay to feel sure that you want to change your mind also. Which I know we've talked about the complicated nature of Nanette changing her mind, but as someone who at one point in my life ardently believed you must have sex only within the confines of heterosexual marriage, and now I don't believe that anymore. I changed my mind. It's scary to change your mind, so I would tell my younger self to rewatch as much of the shit that she loved as a kid as possible when she was an adult. Because, one, I think it's a pretty harmless way to engage with nostalgia, which we all need to do sometimes. 2, it's bound to be entertaining in certain regards, whether it's the fashion or the really cheesy shit that makes you giggle. And 3, because it will force you to reckon with the world around you in ways that will always be wholly beneficial. And I think that is the key to making the world better, to treating each other better, to treating ourselves better. I already did a rewatch of Dawson's Creek last year. In a couple years, I'll probably watch it again. Now I've watched Cruel Intentions twice in 1 week. I'll have to go back into my memory catalog and pick what's next. Mm-hmm. And I would tell her to enthusiastically do that.
I love this idea of changing your mind. Like Hannah Gadsby says, hindsight is a gift. Give yourself the gift of hindsight. Maybe that's what I would really want to tell my younger self, is you should give herself the gift of hindsight. Because Nanette does change her mind. And had she changed her mind with a better person, like if it wasn't Sebastian that she chose to have sex with because she fell in love with him, then I would feel it was like an empowering moment for her. But because he's so problematic,
I know.
That's really what it is, you know?
I know what you mean. The thing I tell myself is that in 20 years, she'll be a woman in therapy. I don't know. She'll be a woman and she'll remember this and she'll understand what a fucking cad he was. And she'll be like, I dodged a bullet not having to spend the rest of my life with that guy. We had one lovely night together that was couched within like 1 week together. I genuinely have no idea how many days this movie takes place over, but it feels very whirlwind. And I think she'll be like, yeah, I'm glad that I didn't keep him around.
Mm-hmm. I like that reading of it.
Thanks. Plus, you know, now that we know also, like, Reese Witherspoon got away from Ryan Phillippe.
Yeah, she did. She escaped him.
And I think she's doing fine. Mm-hmm. So, thank you, everyone, for listening. We appreciate it. We would also appreciate if you subscribed on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you turn on post notifications so you won't ever miss an episode. If you would like to give us a rating, we would love that also. Help boost our reputation.
Mm-hmm. Check the show notes for the secondary texts we referenced. You can follow the podcast on Instagram at Tell Me I'm Sorry. And email us your own musings and questions at tellmeimsorry@gmail.com. We mean it, please. Really, you can send us emails. You can also follow me on Instagram at _Saint_Margaret_.
And you can follow me on Letterboxd at Marin Harrington if you want to see how many times I continue to watch Cruel Intentions over the course of my life, because I don't think I'm done yet. I'm Marin.
And I'm Maggie.
And you thought we were done, but we're not. We're never done. There's always more to talk about, and Maggie gets to tell us what is next.
I have a whole list of films, and I knew this was one we were going to talk about at some point, but then you picked Cruel Intentions. So I wanted to keep us in the same year, and also after watching Cruel Intentions, I was feeling super nostalgic. And in the beginning of this movie, it lists the location of the setting, and then it says 25 years ago. So this film came out in 1999. It was supposed to be set in the 70s. But now it's been 25 years since. Yeah, so it's like, there's some meta-ness to it. So I thought, we must do this while it's still 2024. The movie is none other than The Virgin Suicides.
Oh, boy. Josh Hartnett. He should not be the first person I'm thinking of when I think of that movie. Kirsten Dunst.
Mm-hmm.
But we were talking about Josh Hartnett earlier. Josh Hartnett is in that movie, right?
I don't think so.
He definitely is. He plays like one of the main guys.
Well, the main guy is what's his face from that 70s show?
That's
Ashton Kutcher.
Ashton Kutcher is
The main guy.
Josh Hartnett. Star of 52 films. The Virgin Suicides.
Who is he?
He plays Trip Fontaine. Yeah. I'm not seeing Ashton Kutcher.
Oh my god, think it was Ashton Kutcher the entire time, but it's Josh Hartnett.
That is so offensive to Josh
they look
Hartnett.
They just look the same to me. Oh my god.
Okay. I've read the novel and I've seen the movie before, but it's been a long time.
I figured you'd have seen the movie before.
So
I can't believe I thought Ashton Kutcher was Josh Hartnett. They look the same to me.
I kind of hate Ashton Kutcher.
I do too.
And I love Josh Hartnett. So by that standard alone, I can't think they look alike.
I hate Ashton Kutcher. I feel neutral about Josh Hartnett. So, dude, they look so the same.
I'll have to investigate this further.
But yeah, no, that makes sense because before I watched it, I knew this was Josh Hartnett. Then after I watched it, I was like, that's Ashton Kutcher. But the reason that The Faculty got suggested to me is because I watched The Virgin Suicides.
Ah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
I did know that was Josh Hartnett. But then, like, I didn't. I really liked revisiting it.
Yeah. Sofia Coppola's first film.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just looking at Danny DeVito?
Yeah. Dude, that was wild. I forgot that he was in it.
Did you know that Danny DeVito was nominated for an Oscar for producing Aaron Brockovich?
No.
Oh.
I didn't know.
It's just so random to me.
It is random.
Because that's a Julia Roberts movie, but Danny DeVito produced it.
Dan DeVito, what a wild guy.
What a gem.
Truly, though. Yeah. He's like a weird dad.
I love him. Everyone loves him.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm excited to revisit this. We say that every time. So excited, but we are. It's good to be full of excitement, even if we say it every single week. Yeah. Okay. That is all. Goodbye.
Bye.